aware of the fact that there's a theory that actually the author of the Laureate Manifesto that you mentioned here, the Beast of Chiefs, that he was an anthropologist and that he was a Scottish immigrant. And this was James Tate.
Yes, but you see, I think you're missing the point, and that's a classic, what I would call linear interpretation. I'm not blaming you. If you have a group of 18 chiefs, I think it was 18 chiefs, who come from an oral civilization, why would you expect that it would be their job to turn it into a European written document? So it was extremely useful for them to have what do you call a ghostwriter, what the French call a nègre, to help them if that's the case. I don't see any problem with that. It's just so I haven't seen a politician in Canada write their own speech in 25 years. We don't say they shouldn't be prime minister.
The question was asked simply in the context of my apparently wrongful interpretation of your statement of anthropology being irrelevant.
No, I think what I would say is this, that all of the things we teach, all of the schools of thing that we teach at universities are extremely useful. The question is, in what context do we teach them, and what are the assumptions that lie within them? And that's what this talk was about. And what I'm saying is that the assumptions that lie within a great deal of what we talk about are troublesome. And I'll give you a small example that we had a chat about this over dinner, that immigration in Canada has had some low points, but there's actually a tradition that goes back these hundreds of years, has always been about adoption. We've had these horrible low points of racism and so on, but the main line has always been about adoption. And it's always been about the idea that you immigrate in order to become a citizen. We're virtually the only country in the world that doesn't choose immigrants, we choose citizens. Now, we're heading in a rather bad direction at the moment, but I hope that that's one of those temporary errors, we'll see. But so that really immigration is like getting engaged, and 4 to 5 years later most people get married. And the interesting thing about becoming married through citizenship is we only have 2 or 3 a century who actually get rid of their Canadian citizenship, whereas we have 50% divorce rate among couples. So I mean, it works quite well. We've only got a couple of odd ducks like Black who throw it away. No, I thought it was quite polite. I've noticed that what I would call the false internationalism of many of our social sciences who meet internationally all the time and talk among each other and come back with international theories to Canada, that what's actually happening is that the dominant players in these meetings are usually the Americans or the English or the French. And so what's actually happening is they're coming back with colonial theories. And so you're suddenly starting to see pop up in Canada the word migrant. More and more people, I heard the number 2 of CSIS the other day talk about, the Canadian migrants. He was talking about the immigrants. And that's because he spends a lot of time with Europeans, and they use the word migrant because they want them to go away. Right? So that's a tiny example of the kind of problem that happens when you're not clear about where you are, what you're talking about, where it comes from, and whether you have something to say. Now that, if you're an anthropologist, that's a lot of work because it means actually saying you've got something anthropological to say which actually comes from here and which is not a derivative of something coming from the world. Doesn't mean you're not interested in the others, just that you're not interested in simply being their shadow. Anyway.
Thank you.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Lourdes Peña, and...
Echo there.
Okay. And I was wondering whether you have read the Discover Canada, the book that Immigration Canada has prepared for...
The new book.
The new book for new citizenship.
Yeah. Have you?
I have read it.
And what do you think of it?
And I think it's giving this false impression of Canada. I mean, I read it and I thought that they have a lot of ideas that don't correspond to the Canada I have met for the 7 years I have been living here. So I was wondering what is your impression, because they have all this English and French ideology, and they have this phrase that the most important concept of Canada is the Queen, because the Queen represents all Canada, and not all Canadians represent the Queen. And I was like, what? Where does this Canada come from? So I was just wondering whether you have read it and have to...
Yeah, I have read it. And I've also read what there was before. So there are many things in it that are better than the one that was before. But there are also some peculiar things in it, you know. And there's no question that there's this somewhat strange obsession on a couple of subjects. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, there's more in there about Aboriginals, but it's put in kind of a sidebar. You know, so it's like we're going to do a special course on, you know, this peculiarity over here, as opposed to saying, gosh, this is central to Canadian civilization. There's not much. I mean, you know, there's a lot in there about military, and you know, I have nothing against that. But there's a lot in there about the police. There's a lot in there about, you know, there's a thing in there that says that one of the principal rights of Canadian, I don't remember exactly, obligations of Canadians is to obey the law. Actually, that's not true. And all the citizens' obligation is not to obey the law. The citizens are the law. We are the guarantee of legitimacy. And the purpose of law is to kind of handle the 5% who run amok. The purpose of law is not to tell 100% of Canadian population what to do. That's a very demeaning view of citizens, to think that all citizens are dying to break the law and therefore you need laws to stop them from doing it. You know, so there are concepts in there that I think are really pretty odd. And clearly, you know, there's somewhat of an obsession with the Queen. All I can tell you is this, that the way the country works from that point of view is very simple. All countries in the world have a head of state. All countries have a head of state. So people who say, well, what do we need Governor General for? I mean, they're missing the boat. All countries have a head of state. There are two models, either, including dictatorships, by the way. There are two models. One is the model in which the head of state and the head of the executive are the same, and the other in which the head of state is separate from the head of the executive. Of the 18 to 20 Western democracies, say it's 18, I can't remember the number, 16 of them have the system in which you have a head of state who is responsible for the holding of the powers but not using them. And one of them puts the head of state and the head of the executive together, that's the United States. And the other remaining one, France, it is one or the other. It depends on who wins the election. Like if the president can win a legislative election, then he can be like an American president. If he can't, then he's like a Canadian, you know, Governor General and Prime Minister. And so the way Canada works is that the head of state of Canada is the Governor General, and the head of the executive is the Prime Minister. And we have a mythological figure who is the Queen. This is, you know, I'm not making a comment on it. She's a mythological figure, but she actually doesn't play any role at all in how the country functions. A Governor General of Canada can go through a full term of office without ever seeing or talking to the Queen. That's not a rudeness, it's just nothing to talk about. And when you do actually see the Queen, you never talk about Canada. And the reason you don't talk about Canada is the Queen actually doesn't have the right to talk about Canada, except in a kind of polite way, you know, anecdotal way. But all of the decisions that are made, head of state decisions, are made by the Governor General without reference in any way, shape, or form to the Queen. There is no phone call. There are no letters. There are no references. None. At all. None. Zero. Okay? And what that means is that since the letters patent, you didn't want to hear all this, since the letters patent of 1947, when a process which had slowly been happening over time, since Elgin in 1848, when we became a democracy under responsible government, when the Governor General, although English, Scottish actually, gave up all political power and handed it to the Governor General and became in effect the head of state as opposed to the head of the executive, and did it very well, Elgin. From that moment on, every year, bits and pieces of the leftovers of colonialism have been, of that part of it, have been taken away. And the last big move was in 1947, the letters patent, when the last remaining pieces of the role of the monarch as head of state were given by the monarch to the Governor General, unilaterally, with no reference back. And so since 1947, the Privy Council Office, which is the legal source of how to manage the country, the clerk of the Privy Council and so on, has always referred in written documents, which are never made public, in written documents to the Governor General as the effective head of state of Canada. That's the official term.